The unexpected invitation Valentina Cruz wiped sweat from her brow as she hauled another recycling bin to the truck. 7 hours into her shift, and the summer heat was unforgiving. Her co-worker, Thomas, shot her a sympathetic look from the driver's seat. 2 more blocks, Val. Then lunch. She nodded, muscles aching. This wasn't how she'd imagined spending her master's degree in environmental science. But the recycling program was her brainchild, the first worker-led initiative in the city, and she was determined to understand every aspect of it from the ground up. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. Probably another volunteer canceling for tonight's community cleanup. She ignored it until her break, when she collapsed onto a park bench with her thermos of cold tea. The name on her screen made her nearly choke mid-sip. Julian Blackwood. 5 years of silence, and now a text as casual as if they'd spoken yesterday. Hey V, in town for Penelope's gala this weekend. Would love if you came as my +1, for old times' sake. Memories flooded back. Julian with his easy laugh and ambitious dreams, before his startup took off and he disappeared into a world of investor meetings and charity galas. Before he'd looked at her small-town dreams with something like pity. Everything okay? Thomas asked, noticing her expression. Just ghosts, she muttered, pocketing the phone without responding. That evening, after her shift and a quick shower, Valentina sat cross-legged on her tiny apartment balcony, surrounded by potted herbs and a small vertical garden. Her roommate's cat, Basil, purred beside her as she finally read Julian's follow-up messages. Come on, V. One night won't kill you. The invite says black tie, but wear whatever you want. I really want to catch up and finally, please? She smiled despite herself. Julian Blackwood saying please was rarer than a solar eclipse. Valentina's finger hovered over her phone. What game was he playing? The last time they'd spoken, he'd made it clear that her recycling crusade was charming but naive. You can't change the world by sorting plastic bottles, Val, he'd said. The words had stung because they'd come from the boy who once stayed up all night helping her rescue tadpoles from a draining creek. Her phone rang, Julian's face appearing on screen. Hello? She answered, surprising herself. She lives! His voice was warm, familiar. I was about to send a search party. I was working, she said, more defensively than intended. Still saving the planet one can at a time? No mockery in his tone, just curiosity? Something like that, she replied. Why the sudden invitation, Julian? There was a pause. Honestly? I'm drowning in these people. Penelope's crowd is all hedge funds and summer homes. I thought having someone real there might keep me sane. Real, she echoed. As opposed to what? As opposed to people whose idea of environmental action is buying carbon offsets for their private jets? He said with a laugh that sounded almost like the old Julian. Come on! Free champagne, fancy hors d'oeuvres. You can lecture the rich about recycling. Sounds like you want me there as the entertainment, she said, but her voice had softened. I want you there as my friend, he said, suddenly serious, if we still are that. Valentina looked at the small desk where her laptop sat open to a grant application, funding she desperately needed for her community program. Penelope Windsor was on the board of several environmental foundations. It was a networking opportunity she couldn't afford to pass up. One condition, she said finally. I'm not pretending to be something I'm not. I wouldn't dream of asking you to, Julian replied, relief evident in his voice. I'll pick you up at 7 on Saturday. Text me your address. After they hung up, Valentina stared at the potted succulents lining her windowsill, plants that thrived in harsh conditions. Like her, they were resilient. Well, Basil, she said, scratching the cat's chin. Looks like I'm going to a party. Whispers among diamonds. The Windsor mansion loomed like a gleaming fortress against the twilight sky, its windows ablaze with golden light. Valentina felt her confidence waver as Julian's sleek car joined the procession of luxury vehicles at the entrance. Second thoughts? Julian asked, his eyes softening as he took in her appearance. Valentina smoothed down her emerald dress, a find from her favorite thrift store, altered by her neighbor who worked as a seamstress. Simple, elegant, and most importantly, made from reclaimed fabric. Her mother's vintage jade earrings completed the look. "Just wondering if I should have prepared a PowerPoint on composting for these people," she quipped, earning a laugh from Julian. "You look beautiful," he said with unexpected sincerity, and terrifying. Perfect combination. As they walked through the grand entrance, Valentina felt eyes turning toward them. Curious, judgmental, assessing. Julian's hand rested lightly on the small of her back, a gesture both protective and possessive that she wasn't entirely comfortable with. "Julian, darling." A willowy blonde glided toward them, her diamond necklace catching the light with every movement. Penelope Windsor, their hostess and Julian's ex from his business school days. "I was beginning to think you weren't coming." Her gaze shifted to Valentina, a practiced smile not quite reaching her eyes. "And this is Valentina Cruz," Julian said. "An old friend. How lovely," Penelope replied, her tone suggesting anything but. Julian never mentioned he had friends from. "Where is it you're from again, dear?" "The same place as Julian, actually," Valentina said pleasantly. "Riverview Heights. Though I didn't have the advantage of leaving for boarding school at 12. Something flickered across Julian's face. Embarrassment? Amusement? Before he could speak, a server approached with champagne. "Enjoy the party," Penelope said, already drifting toward her next guests. "The governor just arrived, Julian. You should say hello." As Julian reluctantly excused himself, promising to return quickly, Valentina found herself alone at the edge of the glittering crowd. She sipped her champagne and observed the room, the extravagant floral arrangements that would be discarded tomorrow, the single-use decorations, the mountains of food that would likely go to waste. "You look like you're calculating our carbon footprint," said a voice beside her. A man with salt and pepper hair and kind eyes extended his hand. "Marco Delgado, that obvious?" she asked, shaking his hand. "Only to a fellow calculator," he replied with a conspiratorial smile. "Though I usually focus on potential ROI, environmental investor," he explained. "And you are?" "Valentina Cruz. I run a community recycling program in Eastside." Marco's eyebrows rose. "The worker-owned one? With the education component? I read about that in the Chronicle last month." Valentina blinked in surprise. "You did?" "I've been looking for grassroots initiatives with scalable models," he said. "Your program has some innovative approaches." Before Valentina could respond, Julian returned, his expression tightening slightly at finding her in conversation. "Marco?" He nodded. "I see you've met Val." "We were just getting acquainted," Marco said easily. "Your friend has quite the reputation in sustainability circles." Julian looked between them, clearly caught off guard. "Does she now?" "I should find my wife," Marco said, handing Valentina his card. "But I'd love to hear more about your work sometime, Ms. Cruz." As Marco walked away, Julian studied Valentina with newfound curiosity. "You didn't tell me you were famous." "Hardly," she laughed. "But our program did win a small grant last year. Got some local press." "Julian!" Penelope appeared, clutching his arm. "Harrison Wells is asking about your new venture. Come chat with him. It could mean big things." She threw a dismissive glance at Valentina. "I'm sure your friend won't mind amusing herself for a bit." Julian hesitated, looking genuinely torn. "Val, go!" Valentina encouraged him. "This is work for you." "I'll be fine." As she watched him being led away by Penelope, who was whispering urgently in his ear, Valentina caught fragments of nearby conversations. "Did you see what she's wearing? Vintage, I suppose, if we're being generous. Julian always did have eccentric tastes. Probably some charity case he's mentoring." Valentina's cheeks burned. She'd known this would happen, yet the sting of dismissal was sharper than expected. She stepped onto the terrace for fresh air, wondering why she'd agreed to come at all. The night sky above was void of stars, drowned out by the city lights. Exactly the problem with so much in this world, she thought, real beauty obscured by artificial dazzle. "There you are." Julian's voice came from behind her. "I've been looking everywhere." "Missing your token environmentalist already?" The words came out more bitter than intended. Julian winced. "I deserve that. I'm sorry about Penelope." "It's not just her," Valentina sighed. It's all of this. Why did you really bring me here, Julian? To show me what I'm missing? To prove how far you've come? He leaned against the balustrade beside her, suddenly looking tired beneath his polished exterior. Maybe I wanted to show myself what I'm missing. Their eyes met in the dim light, a moment of raw honesty that neither expected. Behind them, the party continued, a world away from the quiet truth unfolding on the terrace. The revelation Valentina and Julian returned to the party just as dinner was announced. The banquet hall glittered with crystal and silver, each place setting a work of art. Julian guided her to their assigned table, where they were joined by Harrison Wells, the tech billionaire Penelope had mentioned, and several other guests who regarded Valentina with polite curiosity. "Julian tells me you work in waste management," said a woman with a diamond-crusted watch that could probably fund Valentina's program for a year, environmental restoration and community sustainability. Valentina corrected gently. "But yes, that includes dealing with what others throw away." "How?" "Noble," the woman replied, clearly at a loss. Harrison Wells leaned forward, his interest seemingly genuine. "Actually, waste processing technology is a growing sector. My company's looking at investments in the space. Most technology focuses on dealing with waste after it's created," Valentina said. "The real solution is preventing it in the first place." Julian watched her with an unreadable expression as she spoke passionately about circular economy principles. The table's attention had shifted entirely to her, even as the first course arrived, a delicate arrangement of imported delicacies on disposable decorative plates. "The irony isn't lost on me," Valentina said with a pointed look at the plates, earning uncomfortable chuckles around the table. "What's your educational background, Ms. Cruz?" Harrison asked, deflecting the tension. "Master's in environmental science from State," she replied. "But my real education comes from working with communities affected by environmental neglect." "Valentina grew up in the same neighborhood as me," Julian interjected. "She was always the smartest person in our school." The surprise on their tablemates' faces was unmistakable. These people couldn't imagine Julian coming from anywhere but privilege. "Julian's being kind," Valentina smiled. "He was the one with the perfect SAT scores. I just cared more about saving the local pond than getting into Harvard." "The pond where we caught frogs," Julian said softly. "You organized a whole cleanup when we were 16. "And you designed the filtration system," she reminded him. The intimate memory hung between them, a glimpse of shared history that seemed to bewilder their companions. Dinner progressed through multiple courses, the conversation flowing more naturally as wine was poured. Valentina found herself genuinely enjoying Harrison's questions about sustainable infrastructure and another guest's interest in community-based solutions. When dessert arrived, Penelope clinked her glass for attention. "Before we move to dancing, I'd like to announce the focus of this year's Windsor Foundation grants." The room quieted as Penelope stood, resplendent in designer finery. "After much consideration, we've decided to concentrate on technological solutions for environmental challenges. Harrison's company has generously offered to match our funding for projects that utilize artificial intelligence in climate mitigation." Polite applause rippled through the room. Valentina felt Julian's eyes on her but kept her expression neutral. "Additionally," Penelope continued with a practiced smile, "we'll be funding educational initiatives to encourage young people to pursue careers in environmental engineering, showing them that one doesn't need to get one's hands dirty to make a difference." The subtle dig wasn't lost on Valentina. Around the table, glasses were raised in toast, but Harrison Wells was watching her with undisguised interest. "Ms. Cruz," he said as the formal announcements concluded, "I'd be interested in hearing your perspective on our approach." Valentina took a measured breath. "Technology has its place, Mr. Wells, but algorithms can't replace community knowledge. The people living with pollution understand the problems better than any AI." "You disagree with our foundation's focus?" Penelope asked, her voice carrying just far enough to draw attention. "I think balance is needed," Valentina replied evenly. "High-tech solutions alongside grassroots efforts. Both have value." "Perhaps you'd care to elaborate," Harrison suggested, genuinely engaged. What would your approach be if you had the Windsor Foundation's resources? The question hung in the air like a challenge. Julian tensed beside her, but Valentina saw an opportunity she couldn't ignore. I'd start by asking the communities you're trying to help what they actually need, she said. I'd invest in local leadership and sustainable job creation. I'd ensure technology serves people, not the other way around. Her words resonated through the suddenly quiet room. Even the servers had paused to listen. That sounds impractical, Penelope said dismissively. Hardly scalable. Actually, Harrison interjected, it sounds exactly like the community-centered approach that's showing the best long-term outcomes in our impact studies. He turned to Valentina. Would you be willing to share more about your program specifically? Penelope's smile froze as Valentina found herself the center of attention, not as Julian's curious +1, but as a voice worth hearing. As she began describing her work, Julian watched her with dawning realization. This wasn't the Valentina he'd left behind, the idealistic girl with big dreams. This was a woman who had built something real, something valuable, while he'd been chasing the next funding round, the next status symbol. The revelation settled in his chest like a stone. He hadn't brought her here to show her his world at all. He'd brought her here to remember what he'd lost. Seeds of change. The evening transitioned from dinner to dancing. The ballroom transformed into an elegant nightclub with a live orchestra. Valentina found herself surrounded by a small group of genuinely interested listeners, Harrison Wells, Marco and his wife, and surprisingly, a famous fashion designer named Olivia Chen who had approached after overhearing Valentina's comments about textile waste. The amount of fabric discarded in production is criminal, Olivia said passionately. I've been trying to implement zero-waste pattern cutting, but getting the industry to change is like turning an ocean liner. That's why community-scale solutions matter, Valentina explained. They prove what's possible, create demand for change from the bottom up. Julian hovered at the edge of the conversation, watching Valentina shine in a way he'd never anticipated. She wasn't playing the room like the networkers he knew. She was genuinely connecting, her enthusiasm infectious. Penelope glided over, her smile strained as she assessed the situation. I see you've all found our most unexpected guest quite fascinating. Valentina was just explaining how her program has reduced landfill waste by 30% in her district, Harrison said. Remarkable results on a shoestring budget. How? Quaint, Penelope replied. Though I wonder if those resources might be better used developing larger infrastructure solutions. Or, Marco suggested, perhaps the foundation could scale up successful community models like Ms. Cruz's. Penelope's expression tightened imperceptibly. The board has already established our priorities for this year, Marco, but we always welcome diverse perspectives. Julian stepped forward then, surprising even himself. Valentina's program employs people who would otherwise struggle to find work, Penelope. It's not just environmental, it's social impact. All eyes turned to him. None more surprised than Valentina's. I didn't realize you were so familiar with her work. Julian, Penelope said coolly. I should have been, he replied, holding Valentina's gaze. It's impressive. The orchestra began a new song, and Julian extended his hand to Valentina. Would you dance with me? She hesitated only briefly before accepting, allowing him to lead her onto the dance floor. His hand at her waist felt both familiar and strange as they moved to the music. You didn't have to do that, she said quietly. Yes, I did, he replied. You were always right, Val. About what matters. She studied his face, searching for insincerity but finding none. What happened to you can't change the world by sorting plastic bottles? Julian winced. I was an arrogant ass. Still am sometimes. Sometimes. She teased, and he laughed, the sound genuine. I built a company worth millions, he said soberly as they turned across the floor. But you built something that actually helps people. The vulnerability in his voice caught her off guard. This wasn't the Julian who had left her behind. Or perhaps it was, beneath layers of acquired polish. It's not too late, you know, she said, to build something that matters. Before he could respond, they were interrupted by Olivia Chen, her expression animated. "I'm sorry to intrude," she said, "but I've had the most wonderful idea. Valentina, what if we collaborated on a sustainable fashion line made entirely from reclaimed textiles, with proceeds supporting environmental programs?" Valentina blinked in surprise. "That sounds incredible, but my company could provide technological support," Harrison added, joining them. "Smart recycling bins, an app for tracking textile waste collection? And my fund could back it," Marco chimed in, his wife nodding enthusiastically beside him. "Community-based production, living wages, circular design principles." Valentina felt momentarily overwhelmed. "This is all happening very fast." "Welcome to my world," Julian murmured, but his smile was proud. Across the room, Penelope watched the impromptu meeting with a mixture of irritation and calculation. After a moment, she squared her shoulders and made her way over, glass in hand. "I couldn't help overhearing," she said smoothly. "Perhaps the Windsor Foundation should reconsider our approach. A pilot program combining community expertise with technological innovation might be worth exploring." The strategic pivot was masterful. If Penelope couldn't beat them, she would lead them. Julian caught Valentina's eye with a subtle smirk that said, "Classic Penelope." "We'd welcome the Foundation's involvement," Valentina said graciously, recognizing the olive branch for what it was. "Diverse perspectives, after all." Penelope's smile tightened at having her own words reflected back to her, but she raised her glass nonetheless. To unexpected collaborations, as the night continued, Valentina found herself at the center of what felt like a small revolution, sketching ideas on cocktail napkins with Olivia, exchanging contact information, making plans for site visits and proposals. Julian watched it all unfold with a strange mixture of pride and wistfulness. He'd brought Valentina here thinking he was doing her a favor, offering her a glimpse of his world. Instead, she was transforming it before his eyes, planting seeds of change in fertile ground he hadn't even known existed. When she finally returned to his side, her eyes were bright with excitement and possibility. "Having fun?" he asked. "This is incredible," she admitted. "Things like this don't happen in my world." Julian looked around at the glittering party, seeing it through new eyes. Maybe they should. Maybe both our worlds need changing. The weight of his words hung between them, an admission and perhaps a promise. New Horizons, 3 months after Penelope's gala, Valentina stood in the renovated warehouse that now served as headquarters for the East Side Environmental Collective. What had once been a cramped office with 2 desks was now a bustling community hub, with educational spaces, a textile recycling center, and an urban garden on the roof. "The solar panels are fully operational," Marco reported, reviewing the building's energy metrics on his tablet. "You'll be generating surplus power by next month." "And the apprenticeship program is oversubscribed," added Olivia, who had set up a design studio in one corner where local youth learned to create fashion from reclaimed materials. "We've had to start a waiting list." Valentina nodded, still sometimes disbelieving of how quickly things had evolved. The evening at Penelope's had catalyzed connections that transformed her small operation into a model program, with funding from the Windsor Foundation and technical support from Harrison's company. Most surprising of all had been Julian's involvement. He'd quietly invested in renovating the building, then stepped back to let Valentina lead, a reversal of dynamics that hadn't gone unnoticed between them. "Delivery for Ms. Cruz," called a familiar voice. Julian appeared in the doorway carrying a potted tree. "Office warming present." "You know plants are my weakness," she said with a smile. "Making space for the young maple, indigenous species, naturally filtered rainwater irrigation system included," he replied. "I did my homework." Marco and Olivia exchanged knowing looks before making excuses to check on other areas of the facility, leaving Valentina and Julian alone. "The place looks amazing," Julian said, genuinely impressed. "Your vision brought to life." "With a little help," she acknowledged. "I never expected any of this." "I did," he said quietly. "Not the specifics, but I always knew you were capable of remarkable things, Val." She studied him, the man she'd once loved, then resented, and now wasn't quite sure how to categorize. He'd changed these past months, or perhaps returned to who he'd been before ambition had narrowed his vision. "Your new venture launches next week," she said. Nervous? Julian had surprised everyone, including himself, by stepping back from his tech company to start a social enterprise focused on environmental justice in underserved communities. Penelope had called it a midlife crisis. Harrison had called it inspired. "Terrified," Julian admitted with a laugh. "This is the first thing I've done in years that feels right. But I'm way out of my depth." "Good thing you know an expert," Valentina teased. Their eyes met, the moment stretching between them. Not quite romantic, but rich with possibility and shared purpose. They had found their way back to each other, not as they were before, but as who they had become. "The community forum starts in 10 minutes, called Thomas, now the program's operations manager. "Full house already?" Valentina nodded, gathering the presentation materials she'd prepared. Today they were unveiling plans for expanding the model to 3 new neighborhoods, with local leadership in each location. "Ready to change the world?" Julian asked, offering his arm with a hint of the boyish charm she remembered from years ago. Valentina took it, feeling the steady strength of partnership. Not the Hollywood reunion she might once have imagined, but something more valuable, authentic connection and aligned purpose. "One neighborhood at a time," she replied, as they walked together toward a future neither could have predicted, a horizon new to them both, yet somehow familiar, like coming home to a place you've never been before, but always belonged. Behind them, the young maple stood in its pot by the window, roots establishing themselves in fresh soil, branches reaching toward the light, a living metaphor for growth, resilience, and the quiet power of returning to one's true nature.